Welcome to the 90th episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Today we're here to discuss UFC 283. This is going to be your standard preview. We're going to talk the fight, what I'm looking forward to, and I'm going to give a little breakdown who I think is going to win, and I will also talk about betting as well. So we're going to kind of cover all the bases here in terms of what you can expect from a preview. So no matter what you like, we've got it here. Now, to start it off, we're going to start right at the main event. Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill. This is a very interesting fight. Okay. I really like Jamahal Hill as a fighter. I am partially biased towards Jamahal Hill. Simply because he is from Michigan. I am from Michigan, so I will always be rooting for Jamahal Hill. But from an unbiased standpoint, I do think he is a very good fighter, and I do think he has serious championship-level talent, especially on the feet. He has very good hands, lots of speed, lots of power, good length. But he also has some really underrated tools on the feet as well. He has good kicks. He's not bad from the Muay Thai clinch either. So he can strike from a lot more positions than a lot of people think. But ultimately, it is that boxing. It is that power in his hands. It is that ability to find a big shot. He's also a little bit more technical, like I said, with some of those other traits. But he can also switch stances fairly well, too. A lot better than a lot of light heavyweights. So that is another thing that I like out of Jamahal Hill. And for Glover Teixeira is someone who I have a lot of respect for. First of all, the obvious reason is because he's a 43-year-old. He won a belt in his 40s, and he has accomplished a lot in the sport of MMA. I love that. But the reason that I think so highly of Glover Teixeira is because I love the way that he approaches his grappling, right? A lot of people, I feel like when they analyze this fight, they just say, well, Glover Teixeira is the better grappler here, but they don't really explain what makes him such a good grappler. What Teixeira has been able to do in terms of evolving his ground game is very impressive. He is a legit, BJJ practitioner, right? And he is a legit good wrestler, right? There's a lot of guys, right? I'm not saying Glover Teixeira is the only fighter out there that actually has a balance of BJJ and wrestling, but it is not as common as you would think, right? Someone like Aljamain Sterling, who is a really good wrestler, goes out there, gets takedowns, is very good at taking the back. Someone like Khabib or Islam or Umar, all those guys as well, have legit level takedowns and can pass guard and find submissions. So I'm not saying Glover Teixeira is the only one with this balance of BJJ and wrestling, but his ability to go out there and get a takedown. And once he's on top, he mixes his ground and pound with his submissions, and he can do damage and kind of wear on you. Even if he doesn't land a submission, he lands elbows, he lands ground and pound shots, right? Even at a minimum, he's digging his forehead right into your chin, and he's making you feel uncomfortable, and he's making you tired. That is something that is a little bit underrated in terms of his skill set. People will just say he's a good grappler, but really the levels of his grappling and the ways that he mixes, that sounded terrible, the way he mixes his BJJ and wrestling, I absolutely love from just a strategic standpoint, because I think that is the way to approach the grappling game. When a lot of people see it as, oh, I use my BJJ to counter this, or I use my wrestling to do this. No, in reality, it's who can pick the best parts of wrestling and who can pick the best parts of jiu-jitsu and who can take those things and kind of put them together in a puzzle to come up with the best ground game. That's something that Glover Teixeira has done very well, so I respect him a lot for that. On the feet, he is very underrated, right? He has good boxing offensively. I think there are some defensive holes in the way that he strikes. He gets hit a lot and way too often. And I think that is just an athleticism issue, right? He's not as good with his reaction time. It's not like he doesn't know how to move his head. I think sometimes he just reacts a little bit too slow, or it's just not quick enough. And That is a little bit to do with the fact that he's 43, but that has also kind of been his career as well. That isn't, something that kind of happened when he got old. He's been kind of dealing with this when he was younger as well. But, when you're older, that problem does get a little bit worse. But if Glover is able to put his hands on you, he can do a lot of power, or he can do a lot of damage because he has very underrated power in his hands. Hence why he wobbled Yuri Prochazka pretty badly in their fight. And he hurt some other guys on the feet as well. He got Jan Blachowicz very bad. And I think he does a little bit better up against the fence. When he has you corralled up against the fence, he does a really good job of picking up volume and being opportunistic in that moment. And then, if the going gets tough while he's striking up against the cage, he can always come in for a takedown as well from that position. So, I will say this. This is one thing in this matchup that I'm not really actually two things that I'm not too sure about is how is Jamahal Hill going to do against the grappling? Because I think Jamahal Hill has good grappling. Will Jamahal Hill be able to continuously defend takedowns without getting tired? If he does get taken down, can he get back to the feet while avoiding submissions? Once again, that takes a lot of energy. Will he get tired? So those are kind of my questions here in this bout. I think if Jamahal Hill can prove to at least be, he doesn't have to be perfect on the ground. He just has to be manageable. He has to be manageable enough to where he can keep this fight standing and land those strikes on the feet, because he does have a knack for landing those power shots, and he does have lethal power. If you're to look at Glover's opponents, Jamahal Hill has more power than a large portion of them, especially in his more recent stretch of fights. Obviously, I'm not saying Jamahal Hill has more power than Anthony Smith, Anthony Johnson. But with that being said, he does have more power than someone like Anthony Smith is another good example of Jamahal Hill has more power than him. Now, the thing that I would really like to say about this fight is I think that this is actually the worst matchup for Jamahal Hill in the upper portion of the light heavyweight division. I said I think Jamahal Hill will win a title eventually one day, and part of my thought process behind that, which we may be able to get right on that prediction. I believe I said that before he was ranked or when he just jumped into the rankings. I'm not exactly sure. I don't have the best memory, but it was relatively early, quite a while ago. Not really going to pat myself too hard on the back because, like I said, I am biased in his favor, so it has worked out favorable for me so far. But with that being said, I think that Glover Teixeira is one of the worst matchups that you could give Jamahal Hill, because I think in a lot of other matchups he could find success and it wouldn't be as big. I wouldn't be as concerned. Honestly, I do think Jamahal Hill would beat Yuri Prochazka, and I would be more confident in saying that. I think that Yuri Prochazka has some defensive liabilities, and I think Jamahal Hill would be able to capitalize on that, and I wouldn't have to worry about the grappling as badly as you do with someone like Glover Teixeira. Magomed Ankalaev, I think, is an interesting matchup, and maybe he could go out there and out-grapple Jamahal Hill as well. But someone like Jan Blachowicz, for example, right? I think Jamahal Hill beats Jan Blachowicz easier than he does Glover Teixeira. So I do think this is a tough matchup for Jamahal Hill. And the last thing before I give my prediction and we break into betting is I am interested to see how many times Glover attempts takedowns and how committed he is to that ground game. If I were his coaches, I would say he should be working to get the fight to the ground a lot, because even if he's not coming out on top in all of these grappling scenarios, as long as he's not getting dominated in the grappling, which I don't expect that to be the case. But even if he's making Jamahal Hill work, I ultimately think that is a positive sign if you're Teixeira, and you can hopefully pull ahead in the later rounds. With that being said, my prediction for this fight is I think Jamahal Hill gets it done. I think he's able to land some jabs and start putting 1-2s on Glover, and I think he's able to find some check hooks and some counter hooks when this fight is, when Glover is coming in. So I think he's able to land a lot of powerful shots, and I think he can land a variety of shots. I don't think at 43, coming off an absolute war, I just question how much Glover Teixeira has left in the tank. And if he's even close to E, Jamahal Hill is the type of guy that will take advantage of that, right? It's Jamahal Hill isn't the type of guy that you want to fight if you're going to have your first big chin issue, or if your chin is going to start deteriorating. Jamahal Hill isn't the guy you want to fight. And I know we have not seen this from Glover yet. However, he is 43, coming off an absolute war. So I do think that chin will be a little bit deteriorated, and Jamahal Hill will eventually be able to find a KO. I'll take it in the second round, but I do think it will come later in that second round or in that third round. With that being said, I could easily sit here and pick Glover Teixeira. I easily could tell you that Glover Teixeira could take him down, hold him down, and eventually find a submission. If someone were to say that to me, I would not argue with them. I would understand their exact viewpoint, and I wouldn't really disagree too much. Ultimately, I think we're looking at a close fight here that, someone's going to look dominant in this fight. I do think. I think one of the two dominant outcomes will happen. I just think it's going to be Hill that comes out on top of this one. Now, from a betting perspective, I would not bet this line straight at -146. Right? I think it's too. I think it's too wide there. I think if you're gonna take this fight straight up, you have to take it on the plus money side. I get why Jamahal Hill is the favorite, but I don't like taking favorites that are at a grappling disadvantage, right? So I will pick him in this fight, but I don't think I can bet it at -146. That price is just not appealing enough for how close this fight is going to be. With that being said, I don't think Glover +1 or +114 is a bad bet at all. I think that is the better side. Like I said, this is going to be a close fight. I can really see either fighter winning this. Like I said, once again, I'm picking Jamahal Hill. But if you have to pick on a close fight like this, I think it's better to be on the side of the dog. Now, some methods of victory, right? I've started to lean away taking methods of victory, but if you're going to take Jamahal Hill, I think you may as well take him to win by KO at -105. I think that you probably don't have to worry too much about that submission or about the points. I think if Jamahal Hill were to land a submission, it would be from him, a similar position to how Yuri landed his. However, when you look at Hill's fight with Thiago Santos, he didn't opt to try and land a submission. He went to the ground and pound instead. So I do think if Hill's in that type of position, he goes back to the ground and pound. So I wouldn't even worry about the submission. The points is an interesting thought process, but once again, even if you look at that Yuri fight, the Yuri fight was getting dragged out between Glover and Yuri, and Glover was up 3-1 going into round 5. So I have a hard time taking that as well. And ultimately, I think if Jamahal Hill wins this fight by KO, he could lose 4 rounds and get it in the 5th round. You know what I mean? He could be landing 1, 2, 3, 4 big shots a round, but he could be in bottom position for 3 minutes of a round, and they give the round to Glover. Especially in Brazil, I don't know what the judging situation is going to look like, but I'm not overly optimistic that we're going to have the rightful winner in every single fight. I do think some hometown judging may be cooking, and that is not an indictment on Brazilian judges. It happens everywhere, probably even worse in other spots, especially places like England. Now, back to the original point I was making. Jamahal Hill could land a knockdown and then be in bottom position for 3 to 4 minutes of a round and lose that round. And that could happen 2 or 3 times, and then he could eventually land that KO in the later rounds. So ultimately, I think if you're taking Jamahal Hill, you may as well just take him to win by KO at minus 105. And then the play that I do have on this fight that I do like is the over round and a half. I think that is an aggressive line for any fight, a round and a half. And I get the thought process here. We're sitting at minus 122 on the over and minus 106 on the under. I do have the over because I think ultimately in that first round we will see a little bit of feeling out process. And I think we'll see a little bit of Yuri testing the grappling. And I don't think the first shot that Jamahal Hill lands puts him out, right? I think it's going to take a couple. He's going to have to wear on him a little bit before he ultimately lands a big shot that puts him out. So, like I said, I did pick Jamahal Hill by second round knockout. But I am going to take the over in this fight. And that over also accounts for Glover Teixeira going out there and grounding Jamahal Hill and trying to control some position on the ground as well. So I do like the over, and I did make a play on the over. Any other bet here that I'd like? How fight ends, minus 160 KO, plus 220 submission. I wouldn't touch that. Decision, no bet. This is a good spot for. Actually, it's not that good of a spot for Jamahal Hill. Decision, no bet, because we can get submissions from Teixeira. So I wouldn't get too crazy with anything else. So I'm just taking the over here. And I'm not going to give you a play on every single fight. There's some fights that should not be bet with a 10-foot pole, and I'll tell you that when we get to those fights. But for this one, this main event, I do have the over. Okay, now moving on to the co-main event. Brandon Moreno versus Deiveson Figueiredo for the 4th time we are seeing this fight. From a technical standpoint, and in the X's and O's, I have a hard time sitting here and giving you an honest opinion on fighter skill sets and what I predict these fighters to do. Because these two have fought 3 times, and we've seen 3 different fights. So it'd be pretty dumb of me to sit here and tell you this is how I think this fight's going to go. Because we've seen these 3 fight 3 times, and for the most part, all 3 of these fights have A, been different, and B, they've been different from the common thought, right? For example, in the first fight, it was Figueiredo's going to run through Moreno. In the second fight, it was last one's a draw, but Figueiredo won if there isn't a nut shot. So I'll take Figgy, but it's going to be a close fight. Moreno goes out there and finishes him. And then coming off the finish, the narrative was, well, maybe Moreno has cracked the code, but also Figueiredo was dealing with the sickness and all this stuff. And that was ultimately a close fight, and we did get a close fight on these scorecards. So I'm not going to sit here and try and break down what I think each fighter needs to do. But the one thing that does stand out to me that I think will be present in this fight and has been present in the first 3 fights is the speed versus power. Deiveson Figueiredo has more power by a mile, and Brandon Moreno is much faster. So whoever can employ that strength to the best of their ability will win this fight. If Figueiredo can really sit down and land some powerful punches, he will win this fight because when he lands, it does damage. On the flip side, if Moreno was able to enter the pocket, land a 1-2, get out of the pocket, slip power shots and land some shots to the body and do these types of things that you need to be quicker to do, I think that will be very beneficial for Moreno. The one technical thing that I do think I'm interested to see here is the leg kick of Figueiredo. In that third fight, Davison landed a lot of leg kicks, and Moreno was heavy on that front leg. So I'm interested to see if we will see a switch in the stance of Moreno. If Moreno will be a little bit lighter on that lead leg, and how will that affect his ability to get in and out of the pocket? How will that affect his fighting style and his abilities if he's switching his stance a little bit? And for and if he's not, is Figueiredo going to be attacking that as much as he did previously? And will it be as effective as it was in that third fight? So that's one thing technically that I'll be looking at. Now, another thing that is really interesting to me is the gym switch, right? So there's a lot of factors on that. I think this fight, more than any, actually, has more external factors that don't really have to directly do with fighting, but impact your performance in the cage, right? It's not who has the better jab or who's the better wrestler, but who's doing the things better outside of the cage. I think has been talked about in this fight more than a lot of fights, right? So as far as the gym switches go, Moreno has switched gyms. He went from Entram, I think, for the first two, and then he switched over to James Krause for the third, I believe. I may have my timelines a little bit mixed up there, but I believe the first two were at Entram, and then the Figueiredo 3 and the Kai Kara-France fight. I believe those two were at Krause. If I'm wrong, then the second, third, and France fights were at Krause at Glory MMA and Fitness. But I think I've got the timeline right. Obviously, with Glory MMA and Fitness going, I guess they're not out of business, but UFC fighters can't train there. So Brandon Moreno will be at Fortis MMA with Saif Sayoud. On the contrary, Davison Figueiredo was training at Fight Ready, and now he is going and he's training at his own gym in Brazil called Team Figueiredo. Now, when I look at that situation, what I see Moreno in the advantage there, in terms of that out of the cage situation, because I think Saif Sayoud is a good head coach, and I think that is more beneficial to Moreno, that switch. I think you could make the argument that he upgraded with his coaching change. And on the flip side, when you are looking at Figueiredo's switch, he's leaving Fight Ready. And I think that's a negative, right? I don't really care where you go. I view Fight Ready as one of the premier gyms in America. So if you're leaving that camp, that I don't view as beneficial regardless of where you go, especially when you had a good performance at Fight Ready in your last fight and you had a good game plan in that fight. So I think that is a negative for Figueiredo. Similarly, Moreno is younger. He, I believe, is 6 years younger. I believe they're 29 and 35, with Moreno being the younger fighter. So in theory, he is the one that is more likely to make improvements heading into this bout. In addition, fighting is usually, in trilogies and rematches, it usually swings, right? So, one fighter will have success in one fight, and then it will swing the other way in the second fight, and then swing back in the third. In this fight, Figueiredo, they tied the first time, but Figueiredo did win 3 of the 5 rounds. So we'll say first fight was a little bit in Figueiredo's favor. Second fight swung in Moreno's favor heavy. Third fight swings back in Figueiredo's favor. And now in this fourth fight, does it swing back towards Moreno? I do think historical trends would tell you yes, at least a little bit. So I do think that is also something to consider. And then the one kind of out of the cage thing that I do like for Figueiredo is that he's in Brazil, right? I touched on it in the last fight. I do think that could help him on these scorecards if it's close, and I do think this will be a close fight. So, if you're keeping track there, a lot of my, out of the cage, positives and negatives, a lot of those went to Moreno. So I'm going to pick Moreno here. I think he has more on his side going into this bout. And I'm going to take Moreno by decision. Now, when we hop over to the betting preview of things, I will say I don't have a bet on this fight. So just keep that in mind as I run through these. I do not have a bet here. Now, I do think this line is interesting. Plus 102 Figueiredo, minus 130 for Moreno. Once again, I think this is the position where this is such a close fight. I don't think you can be on the minus 130 in comparison to the plus 102. I think this fight should probably be split even minus 110 on both sides. If I had to line this fight, I would probably line it at a pick'em. If I had to put a favorite on the line, I would probably put Figueiredo as the favorite, so I don't really agree with the line that is currently set. I do think there has been quite a bit of line movement. I think Figueiredo was originally an underdog in the same area, around plus 105, and then it got closer to a pick'em, and then it went back in Figueiredo's favor. Now, in terms of methods of victory, I think you've got to be a little bit crazy to bet a method of victory. If you can hit, that's good. But I don't like taking methods of victory when I can easily see each fighter winning by any single method of victory. I could explain how Moreno wins by knockout, decision, or sub, and I could explain why I think Figueiredo could win by knockout, decision, or sub. Right? All 6 outcomes are on the table. So, I'm not, taking a method of victory with a 10-foot pole. I think you're just kind of, you're rolling a die at that point, and I don't think it's worth it. Now, Figueiredo to win by submission at plus 1,000, if you're going to take one, that's the one to take. But still, I do not like it. Talking the over/under and the fight to go to the distance. Fight to go the distance is minus 134, and it not to go the distance is plus 102. With the total set at 4.5, with the over at minus 148 and the under at plus 116. This is another one where I think it's tough. I think realistically, I think this goes to a decision. With that being said, I'm not laying minus 134 on this one going to a decision. I just can't justify that price, especially in a 5-round fight, right? In a 5-round fight where both guys have the ability to go out there and get a submission, and both guys have the ability to get a knockout, and one of them is the hardest puncher in the division. I think it's goofy to get antsy here and take that minus 135 for the fight to go to decision. Once again, plus 102 is the better play, but I don't think that I can justifiably take either of those bets. So I don't have a betting play on Moreno and Figueiredo. Moving on, Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny. I think Gilbert Burns beats the absolute crap out of Neil Magny. And if we weren't on YouTube, I would have said something other than crap. But I do have this podcast registered as not explicit, which probably shouldn't have done that, but here we are. Now, Gilbert Burns, I just simply think that he's a better mixed martial artist. He's better everywhere. Neil Magny's thing is that he's a tough, well-rounded fighter. But Gilbert Burns is also well-rounded, but he has more elite skills, right? He's got better striking. He's got better boxing. He's got better power. He's got better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The only thing that Neil Magny has in this fight that I do like is his length, and he still doesn't use his length that great. And he is tough as just about anyone on the roster, and I love that out of fighters as well. But it gets to a point where toughness can only overcome so much of a skill gap, and I do not think that that will be applicable in this one because I do not think Gilbert Burns is going to wear out in a 3-round fight. So I will be taking Gilbert Burns here. And I'm going to take him by knockout in the third round, excuse me. But and the reasoning for that is because I do think he beats up on Magny for a while before he is able to land a finish. I think he gets to that finish, but I do think it takes him a minute, right? Neil Magny is a very, very tough guy. And this finish will not come easy. Gilbert Burns will have to land a lot of strikes to find a finish in this one. So my pick is Burns knockout round 3. Betting wise, obviously, never lay minus 500 straight on any fight ever. I do have Gilbert Burns in a parlay at minus 500 though. I do think he is a pretty good parlay piece as long as you're not like expecting him to, you know what you're getting here. If this is the minus 500 that you want in your parlay, I don't think Magny has a ton of win upside, so I do think this is a relatively safe parlay piece. Once again, he's minus 500. That's not really a surprise, and that isn't adding a ton of value to your parlay. But it is a nice little chunk to throw in there just to make it a little longer. This is another one where they really try to get you betting, will the fight go the distance? Yes, plus 108. No, minus 142. And to me, that is just purely, do you think that Neil Magny will be able to survive? I said no. When I was asked that question, I said no, right? I just gave you my pick. I don't think he survives. However, I do like that plus 108, but I pick fights and then I look at betting lines, right? Not straight fights, right? I look at betting lines not on purpose, but because you see them everywhere, right? The second that John Jones' Cyril Gane got booked, you open Twitter and the first thing you see is John Jones is an underdog plus 160 at betonline.ag. And it's like, well, that's a silly line. And I opened up my app, not on betonline.ag, but I opened up my resident sports betting app and bet on John Jones as the line has moved and he's a favorite. But now we're getting off track, getting back on track. This is the type of spot for me. I do like this fight to go the distance at plus 108 just because Neil Magny is so tough. However, I'm not going to bet that line because ultimately, when I made a prediction for this fight, I said that Gilbert Burns gets that finish. So I'm not going to let that plus 108 number alter my view on this fight, and I'm not going to force a play here on will the fight go the distance. Just because I like the price that they're giving me. Gilbert Burns to win by KO or submission at minus 125. Similarly, I wouldn't really bet this because even though I do think he wins by KO, how much more value, right? You might as well just give up the 17 points there and take the fight not to go the distance, just in the case that Neil Magny does something crazy. So that is probably the advice I would give you there. Outside of that, over under, I do think the over 2.5 at minus 108. Obviously, you're giving up some money, but I think if I think if I think if you're gonna bet this fight to go to the decision, will this fight go the distance? Plus 108. So I think if you're going to bet this fight to go to a decision at plus 108, you may as well take the over 2.5 rounds at minus 108. You're giving up some value, yes. That is not ideal to give up some value, but ultimately, I think if Gilbert Burns gets a finish, it's in that third round. So I think that last 2.5 minutes of this fight will be important, and I think you may as well give up $10 to take 2.5 minutes off your over sweat. So I do think that would be a beneficial move if that's the angle that you're trying to bet this fight. Now, moving on. Jessica Andrade versus Lucky Lauren Murphy. This fight's pretty interesting as well. First of all, I'll bury the lead here on my betting thought process. I think this fight's going to be a lot closer than a lot of people think. Andrade minus 500 to Murphy plus 380. I think we're going to see a lot closer fight than that. I do. In comparison, if you're asking me to pick which minus 500 we're looking at here, I think Gilbert Burns, for example. Gilbert Burns wins more dominantly than Jessica Andrade. Lauren Murphy gets disrespected often because I think it's because she isn't like what you imagine in an MMA fighter, right? She's a little bit older, but she has these traits that just keep her in it. She's so much physically stronger than a lot of her opponents. She's so much more durable and so much tougher than a lot of her opponents that she can go out there and really handle a lot of these fighters that she's fighting. With that being said, she hasn't fought anyone the quality of Andrade in a significant period of time. I believe I looked earlier, she's 6-1 in her last 7. And the one loss in there was to Valentina Shevchenko. So obviously, Shevchenko is obviously better than Andrade. However, she did lose that fight. So she hasn't beat someone of a caliber of Andrade probably ever in her career. Now, I don't think she can't win this fight. I do think this fight will be close. And I think the difference maker here will be the speed of Andrade, right? A lot of the time when we see fighters lose to Lauren Murphy, it's they're quicker than Lauren, but they're not as athletic as Jessica Andrade, or they're not as physically as strong as Jessica Andrade. Andrade is a strong fighter as well, just not as strong as Lauren Murphy. So, like I said, I think that some of that experience and some of that physical strength will help Lauren Murphy make this fight close. It'll help her get in the clinch, and it'll help her hold Andrade up against the fence for periods of time. It'll help her do some damage and wear on Andrade a little bit. But ultimately, I don't think it is enough for her to get a win. So I will take Andrade by decision. And like I said earlier, I am not... this is a no-bet fight for me. We've got Andrade on the book that I'm looking at here. She's minus 530. So I don't think that's a good parlay piece because I do think Lauren Murphy has more of a chance than people are giving her. And methods of victory, Andrade by points plus 140. Andrade by KO, TKO plus 170. Can't pull the trigger on either of those. I think we're looking at 50-50s there. I think it's one of those two outcomes, but I wouldn't. I don't think it's possible to be comfortable enough to bet either of those. But if I were to force to bet one, like I said, I would take her by points at plus 140. But ultimately, this fight is not one that I'm looking to bet on. Will the fight go the distance? Yes, minus 102. No, minus 128. With the over set at 2.5 rounds. Once again, I do like that over line of over 2.5, and I like the fight to go the distance at minus 102. However, I'm not going to play that while you're fighting Andrade, right? I don't think that is a good bet to make. Andrade is a finisher, and while I don't think this fight gets finished, it's just not a smart play in my mind. And now I've pointed out lines in the last two fights where I'm like, yeah, you can take this, but I'm not going to. All of those will probably hit now that I'm not taking them, and I said that I like them. And now that I'm actually giving out bets on the podcast, I bet none of the things that I do take will hit since I've been expressing them out loud. But that's how things go. Now, Paul Craig and Johnny Walker. Paul Craig and Johnny Walker. This is just like every single other Paul Craig fight. Can Paul Craig get it to the ground? And can he get it to the ground long enough to where he lands a submission? However, I do think there is a wrinkle there because I do think that Craig could put up a little bit of a fight with Johnny Walker on the feet just because Johnny Walker's chin is not great, obviously. So that may play a factor in this one. Now, here, I would say that Johnny Walker is going to be a tough guy to get down. Paul Craig doesn't have the best offensive wrestling, and I think that Walker is good enough on the ground to at least stay safe. And on the feet, he will have a lot of rangy tools like a jab and a straight and a teep and his kicks. He can use all of those things to land strikes without entering on the inside. Obviously, if a kick gets caught, that is risky. But otherwise, I think he can do a lot of good things on the outside and land here. So I'm taking Walker, and I'm taking him to win this fight by KO in round 2. I think ultimately he lands here and is able to finish Paul Craig. Now, the line here, Paul Craig plus 160, Johnny Walker minus 200. I don't think you should ever lay minus 200 on Johnny Walker. And you should never, ever, ever put Johnny Walker at minus 200 in a parlay. I think both of those are bad decisions because Johnny Walker is just a fighter that figures out how to lose. So that's not a guy I want to put my money on. Now, method of victory, if you're going to take Paul Craig, you might as well take Paul Craig by submission at plus 300. Plus 300, yeah. Yeah, you're getting another 140 points on that to go and exclude the points, which he's not going to win by decision, and the slim chance that he wins by knockout. So I do think that if you bet Craig, you might as well just go all the way and bet that plus 300. Like I said, I do not see that happening, and I would not bet on that. But if you think Paul Craig wins by submission, there's no reason to take that plus 160 line because the alternative options are not there enough to justify that large of a swing to plus 300 for the fight outcome prop. Now, next, will the fight go the distance? Yes, plus 490. No, minus 800. I don't think the fight goes the distance, and I'm not betting minus 800. That's even dumber. If I want to lay that much, I'll take Jelton Almeida in a minute. So we're not doing that at all. And I accidentally just closed out of my betting app. Nice. It's all right. We got it back. Moving on to the next fight. We are going to start to pick up the pace here because these fights start to get a little one-sided and they start to get a little less interesting in comparison to title fights and main card fights. Mauricio Shogun Rua and Ihor Potera. I'm not going to sit here and give you a spiel about how much I love Mauricio Shogun Rua. First of all, because I am 21 years old, and Mauricio Shogun Rua's prime was largely taking place before I turned 10 years old, for the most part. My math may be wrong. He did some good work past, that's a little bit of an exaggeration when I start to do the math together in my head and think about some timelines. But with that being said, still, I was not able to witness the prime of Shogun, just purely because it happened before I was massively into MMA. Anyways, and any other show that you listen to will give you an hour and a half rundown of how cool Shogun is and how what he did in Pride is so cool, which I agree with, but you've heard it all before, so I'm not going to bore you with it. Ihor Potera, 26 years old, not that great either. I do think these are probably the two worst light heavyweights on the roster, unfortunately. I think they're trying to get Shogun Rua on to exit the UFC with a win. However, with that being said, I do think that Shogun Rua is the worst light heavyweight on the roster, while Potera is the second worst, unfortunately. So I'm going to be taking Potera by knockout in round 2. Betting wise, you can't bet on this fight because you're either betting on Mauricio Shogun Rua, who is, how old is Shogun? Let me Google that. Enjoy my keyboard typing sounds. Shogun's 41. You don't bet on 41-year-olds unless their name is Glover Teixeira. Or how old? We're not going to Google how old everybody is. But, if someone's not ranked and they're in their 40s, or if someone's ranked and they're in their 40s, 90% of the time if someone's in their 40s, you don't bet on them. You also don't bet on absolutely crap fighters like Ihor Potera. But Ihor does have power, so I will give him that. He's got some skills. He's not as bad as I'm making him out to be. He just wasn't that great in his last fight. And I did hit on Nikolai Negumereanu against him, so I am kind of I do think I have a decent read here on what Potera is as a fighter. If you forced me to bet this fight, I'm probably taking the Potera plus 125 to win by KO. That's probably the line that I would go with here. The fight not to go the distance is minus 330. That's not worth it. So Potera by KO at plus 125 is probably the bet if you forced me to try and find a decent bet on that fight. But like I said, that is a fight that you should not even entertain betting unless you want to try and ride with Shogun in his last fight just for entertainment purposes or something. But other than that, don't see it. Gregory Rodriguez versus Bruno Ferreira. Gregory Rodriguez is proving to be a very, very good fighter in this middleweight division. This is unfortunate. This was not the original matchup, I don't think. Rodriguez was supposed to get Brad Tavares, and I don't think that Brad Tavares is ranked anymore, but he was ranked when the fight was booked. I think he just got hopped in the rankings by somebody. But if he's not in that top 15, he's 16, 17, 18, somewhere in that range. So Gregory Rodriguez is really, really getting close to those rankings. And he is proving to be a good fighter. With that being said, his fighting style is so scary. It's so entertaining. It's fun to watch, but it is scary. It's go out there, get hit, and hit harder, and have a better chin, and be more durable. And that's so fun to watch, but in the long-term scope of things, that is not really a path that you want to rely on, because at some point you've taken too much damage. It will happen. There's a reason we saw Tony Ferguson fly down a cliff, because his biggest weakness his whole career was his striking defense, and he took too many strikes. I just don't think it is a positive trait to have in your career, is that you get hit too much. And Gregory Rodriguez gets hit too much. And the thing that you probably don't know is Gregory Rodriguez has some of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on the roster. He has won Jiu-Jitsu tournaments. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be a Jiu-Jitsu expertise or Jiu-Jitsu lover, because frankly I'm not. It's always been wrestling first for me personally, but he has won some jiu-jitsu tournaments that are highly respected, and he is a great Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner. He just doesn't use it, right? He just doesn't use it, and he doesn't want to. His opponent here, Bruno Ferreira, is making his debut after winning his bout on Contender Series, and they needed an opponent to step in and fight Gregory Rodriguez, and this is a massive, massive opportunity for him. Not very often do guys coming off Contender Series get an opportunity against someone who is in that top 20, top 25 range of a division, but that is exactly what Bruno Ferreira has right here. On his Contender Series bout, he won in the first round. The majority of his resume is knockouts early in fights. With that being said, it's not like he's some super technical striker. Just a guy with a lot of power who is willing to take one to give one, and when he gives one, it's usually more impactful in comparison to his opponents, and he wins. So this is really going to be this is probably going to be fight of the night, right? If I had to bet on fight of the night, this would be a good bet. There's some other fights too that could win fight of the night, but I think this is going to be a fight of the night contender. Ultimately, I think Bruno Ferreira hits Gregory Rodriguez a lot. I think Gregory Rodriguez hits Bruno Ferreira a lot. But at the end of the day, I think we do see a Rodriguez style of fight that we've seen in the past, where he takes damage, doesn't get tired, doesn't get knocked out, and somehow his opponent gets tired and he knocks them out, and they just quit. That is what Chidi and Njokuani did. Chidi and Njokuani was beating the crap out of Gregory Rodriguez, and he was doing a lot of really good things. But ultimately, he was not able to get it done. Betting wise, this is another fight you don't touch, right? I don't think this is a fight that you should entertain betting. I don't think that Gregory Rodriguez is that good of a parlay piece. At minus 325, I'm looking at guys like Burns, Moises, Stamen, and I think, was that the last one? Yeah. Those types of fighters, in my opinion, are all better parlay pieces. We'll talk about some of them later. But I'm not going to be willing to bet Gregory Rodriguez at minus 325, and I think there are better parlay pieces that you can find out there. I do think he wins the fight, like I said, but I'm just not laying that amount of money. Gregory Rodriguez by KO plus 110 isn't bad, but I do think that's probably how the fight goes. But what if he decides to use his submissions, right? What if he decides he wants a sub? What if he decides to go club and sub? I think the sub is a real possibility, enough to get me off of that plus 110 Gregory Rodriguez to win by knockout line. Will the fight go the distance? No, it won't. Book has it put at minus 800. Don't bet that either, right? I think this is another no bet. I haven't even really considered betting on this fight, because I think there's a lot of volatility. Some people will tell you bet the plus 250 on Ferreira, because that is the type of spot where if you can consistently bet guys like in matchups like this, if you can consistently be on the side of the guy at plus 250, you will come out on top in the long term. I don't really like to bet like that, though. Um, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but that's not really something that I'm interested in doing. Is trying to spot every single plus 250 and bet every single volatile plus 250 out there. Um, Moving on, what do we got next on the card? Thiago Moises and Mezquiel Costa. This, I believe, is another short notice replacement. Moises was originally supposed to fight Guram Kutateladze. That would be a much, much better fight than this. Costa, I'm almost positive he didn't even fight on Contender Series. Yeah. He does have one fight in the LFA. His Costa isn't a bad fighter. Probably a UFC caliber fighter. I'm going to be honest. I don't really know that much about him. Doing tape study here was not really my first priority. I'm looking at fights later down the line that I think are more intriguing. In terms of film study, this was not one of them. And the reason I didn't really put much effort in film studying this one, I'm not going to bet on anyone that is fighting Thiago Moises in their UFC debut. You can look at Thiago Moises' resume and see the 16-6 and be down on him. But this guy is 5-4 in the UFC, not great. Losses to Islam Makhachev, Joel Alvarez, Benil Dariush, and Damir Ismagulov. Three of those four guys. Alvarez isn't terrible, right? That's not the best loss, but I think he ultimately just got caught there. And he could get caught again, that's possible here. But ultimately, this is not the type of guy that you should be making your UFC debut against. And that's not Costa's fault. But I am not overly optimistic that he can get the job done. And additionally, Moises is 27 years old. So he's still improving too. So I'm not betting against Moises in this spot. And I'll take him to win by decision. Not confident there. I almost said submission, but we're going to go decision. And just scrolling around Moises' Tapology page, it's surprising how many guys he was an underdog against. Plus 185 against Alexander Hernandez. Plus 255 against Bobby Green. Minus 120 against Michael Johnson. Not an underdog, but pretty noticeable. Closer than it should be. Plus 175 against Ismagulov, lost. Minus 125 against Kurt Hollabaugh. That doesn't have a line. This probably doesn't. Minus 260 there in the LFA. A lot of interesting lines there. Sorry, I get distracted sometimes. But if you were to bet on, shout out to anyone who got on that plus 255 spot against Bobby Green. That was a nice bet. Like I said, I'm on the side of Moises. I'd put Moises at at minus 430. That's in a parlay. And then ultimately, it's do you like Moises by points or sub? Plus 180 on each side. Double chance doesn't give you any value at minus. Actually, that's not bad at all. That Moises by TKO or submission. So basically him to get a finish. Oh, TKO or submission. There we go. KO or what? I'm losing. Oh, submission or points is minus 230. Crap. I thought we had something there, but I read the bets wrong. Will the fight go the distance? Minus 200 on the no. Plus 134 on the yes. Fight to go the distance, yes, 134. Oh. There might be something there. I didn't have it on the bet sheet before, though, so we're not going to rush it in here in the middle of the podcast. Anyways, I think you guys get a good understanding where I stand on this fight. I think Moises wins. I think he wins comfortably. I'll take him by decision. Um, Now, moving on. Gabriel Bonfim versus Munir Lazez. Bonfim, I really like the Bonfim brothers. I think they're both very, very good. Good jabs, good boxing, good strikers. A lot of positives from both Bonfim brothers. They're both pretty young as well. I like the Bonfim brothers. I really do. This is a situation here where I think it's just too much too soon, right? I think Munir Lazez is not an entry level UFC opponent. I think this is an opponent where if you win dominantly in your first UFC bout, you get Munir Lazez. But we haven't seen that dominant win yet from Gabriel Bonfim. And this is a stylistic matchup where Lazez is a good kickboxer in his own right. This is going to be a very good technical kickboxing bout. I think this is going to be a close fight, but I will take the experience of Munir Lazez in this fight. And that's not me saying I don't like Bonfim. I just think that this is not the spot here to make his UFC debut. I think down the line he will be very, very good. But I think right now, tomorrow, in this fight, I think that Munir Lazez is going to be the one that wins. I think he will be a little bit better at length than Bonfim as well. So, with that being said, I'm taking Munir Lazez to win straight up. So, I'm going to also take him at plus 136 as well. I think this is a fairly simple concept, right? I think he's going to win, so I'm going to take him if they're giving me plus money on him. That's not much more for me to think about there. Close fight. Close fight. I think the line should be closer, right? If this was, spread, that'd be ideal. I think Lazez, he may lose this fight, but I do ultimately think it will be a close fight. And in that type of close fight, I like the UFC experience. So my play here, betting wise, plus 136. I haven't even looked at the other plays, but I don't really see the need to bet anything else other than that. Bonfim by submission is plus 210. That is strange. He's not really like an elite grappler, I don't think, and unless I'm missing something here. He's a very good boxer. His stand-up is what I like. I might take him by KO at plus 440. Jeez. Nah, I'm not doing that. They'll get you. These sports books know what they're doing with the method of victories, and they will get you. So don't play with them too much, right? What's the over in that fight? We didn't talk about the over. I do think whatever the over is, I think it goes over. Haven't even seen it yet. What do we have? Total rounds. Set it 2.5. 2.5 at plus 122. Am I tripping? Am I not thinking about the same fight as everybody else here? I might take I don't like putting two bets on the same fight, so I'm not going to take it. But the over 2.5 at plus 122 is a pretty good shot there. I think that may be a play. This I am taking, like I said, I'm taking Lazez to win by decision against Gabriel Bonfim. Now, one of the more interesting fights on the card, Jailton Almeida versus Shamil Abdurakhimov, is up next. This, I think, is a pretty straightforward fight. Jailton Almeida is the real deal. He's as good as he is billed to be. At heavyweight, I am a little bit concerned about the physical strength, but I do think his athleticism is where it needs to be. He's going to be so much more athletic than every single heavyweight that he fights. Strength-wise, that is kind of a concern. But the thing is, he has such good technique, and he is very physically strong, right? He's not a small, I think he weighed in around 230. He's not a small guy at 230 pounds. Very, very muscular. And the thing about this is, in terms of physical strength, Jailton Almeida also has very good technique to the point where he doesn't need to be as physically strong, right? The things that he does good is he gets a tight waist very well, and he controls wrists very well, and he has good grip strength, it appears. But when you are able to use those techniques, you don't need to be some physically dominant guy when you have lights out technique. So I think Almeida has the technique to where he doesn't need to be the strongest guy in every single fight because he can work around that with his technique. So once this gets to the ground, I do think he's just going to blast double, take Shamil down. Once this fight gets to the ground, I think he slowly passes guard, and eventually he'll get to the back. It just depends on does he get it in the open mat? Does he get it up against the fence? How does he get the takedown? But ultimately, I do think he takes it back and lands a rear naked choke here. And I think he gets it done in the first round. My play here, initially, I was going to take Almeida to win by submission in the first round. I know that is aggressive, right? You can't bet the minus 1,050, right? That's one of the biggest lines you see in MMA ever. Doesn't get much higher than that. But my initial was Almeida by submission in the first round at minus 125. But that method of victory that they're throwing out there is Almeida by submission, just any round, minus 150. So I'm going to give up the 25 points there and just take him by submission at minus 150. I do think he could get a KO or TKO here, but that would be if he gets on top and just lands ground and pound until the ref pulls him off, similar to what he did against Danilo Marquez, or if you did not watch that fight, what Islam Makhachev did to Bobby Green. I think we could see that type of TKO. But from what we've seen, I think he does lean towards getting that submission, so I think that will be what he attempts to land here. So I will take Jailton Almeida to win by submission, and I will bet that at minus 150 as well. Moving on, next fight on the card, we have Luan Lasarda versus Cody Stamann. This is an interesting fight. Lasarda is a longtime teammate of Jose Aldo, but in all honesty, I do really like Cody Stamann in this spot. When you're looking at the skills that Luan Lasarda has, I don't think he really has the skills needed to go out there and take out Cody. The things that he does well, right? On his biggest skills are his jiu-jitsu, his submissions. But Cody, has only lost by submission twice in his career, and those two times have been against Said Nurmagomedov, one of the best submission artists in that division, and Aljamain Sterling, the champion. Right? Just because Lasarda has good submission skills does not mean that he will be able to do what those guys have done. On the feet, Cody's going to be the better boxer, I believe. He should be able to land strikes on the inside. Lasarda does have some good kicks, but he is not a well-rounded out striker. So I do think that Stamann will be able to control this fight, avoid submissions. I don't think he gets taken down on. I do think he avoids, those few dangerous spots from Lasarda and coasts his way to a decision victory. Like I said, Stamann is in parlays for me. He's one of my parlay pieces this weekend. That's one of my parlay guys. Now, let's see some of the other lines here. I do think Stamann by points at minus 140 is the play. I think that is a pretty good line if you're getting it down from minus 400 to minus 140. So I do like that. I will not be betting it. I just don't see the need to. I'm not, itching to get minus 140 props for a fighter to win by a method of victory. I know that is right after I took Almeida to win by submission, but Almeida is a far better fighter than Cody Stamann. So that's the play there. Have we run through everyone that I have in the parlay? Yes, we have. So I've got a plus 105 parlay. It's nothing crazy. 4 favorites. Almeida to win by submission or knockout. Gilbert Burns to win. Thiago Moises to win. Who was the other fighter I had to win? Uh-oh, guys. I forgot. Let's go through this card. Gilbert Burns to win. And there goes this. Gilbert Burns to win. Moises to win. Cody to win. And Almeida to win by finish. So I said all of those, but I counted wrong and thought we were at 3, not 4. I'm an idiot. That's sitting around plus 100 or so. That's the parlay that I've got this weekend. It's nothing crazy, but ultimately I wasn't. I don't think this was a good weekend for constructing parlays. I don't think a lot of the guys who are sitting in that minus 100 to minus 200 range that you typically can build a strong parlay around. I don't think a lot of those guys are out there this week. So I don't think it's a good parlay weekend, but that is the parlay that I have. You could also throw Jamahal Hill at the end of that parlay and hedge with Glover Teixeira if you get to the 5th leg. That is a possibility, but I would like that line to be a little bit higher than plus 114 if I am going to employ that strategy, which I do like to do. But ultimately, I don't think this is the week for that. All right, we ran through that pretty quick. We got to get to the rest of this card. Good grief, we're at an hour and 12 minutes. That's not good. How many fights we've got left? 4 fights. We're going to get through these quick. Terrence McKinney and Ismael Bonfim. Bonfim very similar to the other Bonfim brother. This is going to be an interesting matchup because Terrence McKinney, you don't really know what you're going to get. Is Terrence McKinney going to go out there and try and knock out Ismael Bonfim until he tires? Is he going to go out there and just wrestle him until he gets a submission? Both of those are outcomes. Off the back of the KO one, does he land the KO or does he get tired and then get KO'd himself? You'd never really know with Terrence McKinney. It's almost impossible to say. And that's why I'm not even going to discuss betting on this fight, because if you bet on Terrence McKinney fights, you are crazy. If you do bet on this fight, you should be betting Bonfim at plus money. I believe he's plus 140 something. Let me check. Bonfim's only plus 100, so I think that swung in his favor quite a bit, so he is getting action there. But if Bonfim wins this fight, it's going to be simple. He's going to avoid those big, powerful shots. He's going to land some counters. And Terrence is going to tire out, and then Bonfim is going to finish him. That's what happens if Bonfim wins. I think McKinney will be able to land at least one shot that gets the knockout, so I will be taking McKinney by knockout in the first round. Not confident enough to bet it just because Terrence McKinney is such a wild card. I like the guy, but it's not the type of fighter that you want to bet on just because you don't always know what you're going to get. Terrence McKinney could be the best. He could literally beat the best fighter in the world on any given day. He could go out there and land a big enough shot to put out Islam Makhachev. Would I pick that to happen? Absolutely not. But he could. It technically could happen. He's got a puncher's chance in every single fight. But at the same time, he could lose to the worst fighter on the roster if he doesn't land that punch, or if he doesn't look to wrestle. So the volatility, like I said earlier, I'm not out here trying to I'm not out here trying to bet on volatile fights. Terrence McKinney is the poster boy for volatile fights. So I will not be betting it, but I will be picking McKinney to win. Warley Alvarez versus Nicholas Dalby. Warley Alvarez is a volatile fighter, right? And I'm going to pick him in this fight, and I'm going to bet on him. I once again buried the lead, but simply put, I do think the best version of Warley Alvarez is a lot better than the best version of Nicholas Dalby. Plus, Warley Alvarez is a little bit younger. Dalby is starting to get up there in age, And I like what Alves can do, right? He is a very, very good and very underrated grappler. And on the feet, he's got a lot of power in his hands. Finished Munir Ladez with body kicks, right? Lots of power, And going back to the submissions, he submitted Colby Covington. He can do a lot of really good work. So I do think he wins this fight, and I'm going to take him by KO in the second round. And I will be betting him at minus 125. I heard this was a little bit higher earlier in the week. I heard that at some point Alves was plus. I heard that he was plus 125 at one point. If you got in at that point, congratulations to you. I do think the skill difference here is big enough to where I like Warley Alvarez and Nicholas Dalby as a fighter that I would look to fade. So I will be taking Alves here, and I am comfortable laying that minus 128 price tag. Josiane Nunes versus Zoram Farn. The biggest story of this fight is the height difference, right? Let me get the tail of the tape up here, but the height difference is astounding. 5'2" on the side of Nunes and 5'8" on the side of Zoran Farn, but I do think she is actually a little bit taller than that. With that being said, Farn isn't really that good of a fighter, doesn't have that good of a ground game. And Josiane Nunes has rocks for hands. I think Nunes gets in the pocket and just swings overhands until she lands a knockout. I'll say knockout round 2. I do think Zarin could give her some trouble. I do think she could, for example, use Muay Thai clinch. That would be a good opportunity to where that size is such an advantage. But at the same time, if Nunes is struggling against something like a Thai clinch, I think she could just pressure in, get the fight up against the cage, get a takedown. Because as Farn is big, she's not good on the ground. So I think Nunes has better power and is better on the ground. That's a bad combo. I will take her to win. And betting wise, I'm not really breaking any news because she is a minus 550 favorite. I'm not betting on the props on the second fight on the card. It's just not the best way to go about things. Nunes to win by KO at minus 120 isn't bad, but at the same time, it's not good either. So I won't be putting my money there. Last fight on the card. Daniel Marcos versus Simon Oliveira. I do have a play here. I'm on the underdog of Marcos, and this has turned very quickly off of breakdown and then prediction and then betting to just betting, breakdown, predictions, and we kind of got all jumbled up here, but you're along for the ride, and I think it makes it go a little bit quicker when we're already a couple hours in. Anyways, Marcos Oliveira. I like Marcos. I think that Marcos is going to be a consistent UFC fighter for a while. I think he's got UFC caliber striking, great leg kick, great jab, and he digs to the body. Those are 3 traits that I like to see. And for someone fighting at this caliber of fight, right, this is the first fight on the card for a reason. These guys are not main card fighters. Marcos in his UFC debut, Oliveira's second UFC fight, 0-1 in the promotion. And the side of Oliveira, he's a lot more wild, right? He'll throw spinning stuff. He will jump ghillie. He has a great guillotine, but if you don't land the guillotine, you are on bottom. And in this fight, I just lean the fundamentals over the craziness, over the wild output. I think that this is a situation where if Oliveira is too wild, Marcos will tire him out quick, will land the leg kick, will really beat on him until Oliveira is gassed, and then he's gassed and hurt, and then Marcos is pouring on with pressure. This is a spot where I like Marcos because I do think that more fundamental fighter is able to get the job done here. That doesn't mean Oliveira can't win because he can. He can find a submission. He can land that guillotine. It's not like it's an impossible task, but ultimately that is just not the way that I see this fight going. I think that Marcos stays safe, will landing some shots and doing damage. So I will take Daniel Marcos in this fight. And similar to the Lazzez fight, I'm picking him straight up to win this fight. And he's also sitting at plus 122 on the money line. I think he's going to win, and he is an underdog. So I will bet him in this spot. And that's the last fight we had to talk about. Did I spend too much time doing this and spend too much time talking? Yes, I did. If you want to see me do it again, I'll be back in 2 days, because this is Friday night, right? It's a late Friday night, and this definitely will not be up on Friday night. This will be up sometime on Saturday. Even if it's early in the morning on Saturday, it physically doesn't have enough time to download and be uploaded to YouTube to get it up on Friday. Anyways, that's not important. I'll be back doing this again on Sunday after the fights. We'll be talking about who fighters should fight next, who looked good, what I saw from, my eyes. What did my eyes tell me during the fights? What did I see? How did fighters win? Things of that nature are things that we will be discussing. I may gather a few news points as well. Not 100% sure yet. I covered a lot and talked about a lot of news last week, so we may not do as much news this week. Regardless, we'll figure out what's out there, and we'll be here talking for a while on Sunday, so make sure you tune into that. But most importantly, thank you for watching this episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Goodbye.
Oh! He front kicked him in the face! Kevin Lee with the ultimate highlight